Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States, and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700.
Blue 35.
Tell us about yourself, would you?
Tell us something about you.
For any new viewers, won't you tell us again about yourself?
We've met before, but let's meet again. Tell us about yourself.
Can you tell us about yourself?
Perhaps you fill us in again and tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Christy Cooper, and I'm from Manchester in the UK, and I'm currently searching for a job because I've just finished my time as a student. In 2022, I was a contestant on Countdown.
Christy, the world of game shows in the UK is similar in a lot of ways to the world of game shows in the United States, but different in a lot of ways as well. There seem to have been a lot more game shows that have come and gone over the past 20 years or so. I'd love to know what role game shows played in your life growing up and what shows you enjoyed in particular.
Well, I mean, I'm only young now, I'm only 19, but even as a child, I always enjoyed watching, Countdown. I think I was always good at spelling and stuff in school, so I think maybe things like Countdown helped. I also used to enjoy watching Deal or No Deal because they were always paired together on Channel 4. It was always Countdown followed by Deal or No Deal. So I used to watch those two a lot as a young child.
I'm trying to think of, there are a lot of shows that are considered classics in the UK that lasted, a few years here and there, and their sort of original American versions. Blockbusters comes to mind. I think altogether that aired for 2 years in the early 80s here, and then for a season in the late 80s. But in the UK, I mean, that's a classic show. Yeah,
and it's been revived a lot of times. The thing, it's interesting you mentioned Blockbusters. None of the revivals have, done as well as the originals. So I think maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a sign that sometimes they should just leave the classics alone. I don't know, maybe.
I think so. That's a lesson that I think is learned time and time again, especially over the past few years, where we're getting this sort of we're revisiting so many nostalgic shows and reboots and remakes and things like that. And it's happening over here now with a lot of our game shows, but I think that in the UK, I mean, it's happening a lot as well. I mean, you have a new Jeopardy hosted by Stephen Fry coming soon. Deal or No Deal, they're rebooting, I read. I think it takes a certain creative mind to reboot a show in a way that's sensitive to the original material, that doesn't alienate the people who grew up watching it, and also doesn't look like a complete retread of what everybody watched for years and years. It's a challenge to make it fresh and not fresh at the same time.
Yeah, I think not all revivals. I think one that did was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, when they revived that a few years ago, because towards the end of the original, they changed the format a bit by adding the clock to it and everything. But when they brought it back, they went back to basics, so the contestants could take their time a bit more, which I prefer because I think it makes it more tense. I think the clock format felt a bit rushed at times.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I was actually a contestant on the season of Millionaire here in the United States where they introduced the clock, and I had a certain amount of time for every question, and then whatever time you didn't use throughout the other questions, if you happened to make it to the million, that was the amount of time you had for that question. So you got to use all your unused time. And I'm biased, but I much preferred the drama of the original format where you can take your time and reason it out, and watching that thought process at play, I thought was what made that show so fascinating.
Well, yeah, because I think without being taught, you have more time to think and kind of work out your answer, whereas during the clock format, you're kind of rushed to think of an answer, so you sometimes might just say, you might just blurt out an answer and then it's, logged in. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, I think it made part of the game psychological. You're watching because it's not just whether you know the answer or not. It's whether you want to gamble, whether you are happy with the money that you have, whether you want to use a lifeline or not. There's so many other elements at play that are interesting to watch. And, like the psychological aspect of game shows, I find really fascinating. And it's something that American game shows don't really capitalize on. We're very heavy on the money and the excitement and the jumping up and down and screaming and all that. But as far as the mental and like I said, the psychological aspects of game shows, there aren't too many here that really capitalize on that the way some of the UK shows have. I'm thinking of Deal or No Deal. I'm thinking of Millionaire. I'm thinking of, Only Connect is an incredibly cerebral show that I don't know that we have anything here that compares to that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Only Connect because, there's a few game shows over here that aren't necessarily for cash prizes, Countdown, Mastermind, Only Connect. I don't think that would necessarily work in the US game shows that don't have a cash prize, because that's kind of the incentive over there, whereas here, I think people just go on more for the experience than necessarily, to win money.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, American game shows really were among the first bits of entertainment to capitalize on that idea of the American dream. Back in the 50s and 60s, sometimes a prize was, a freezer full of pork chops, or it was, a new car or a dinette set, or things that were seen to, advance your status as a quote unquote American family. I think you're right. I think that type of culture wouldn't play well in America. I talked to Mark Labette from The Chase a few weeks ago, and he mentioned the same thing, that there's a culture in UK quizzing and UK, the UK game show scene that allows for that kind of prize. It's bragging rights. It's a trophy, which I think is, I mean, I love it. I owned a Countdown teapot for a few months, and it broke in a terrible moving accident. But having being able to own something like that, which I'm sure is sometimes more valuable than any other sort of merchandise you can bring home, even money. The sentimental value is just off the charts.
Yeah, that's true. Because even with money, you're probably going to spend it eventually. Whereas prizes like a Countdown teapot, little prizes like that, you have them with you forever, really.
Yeah, it's very true. And there are a lot of shows over there that give away. I'm thinking about the Glass Bowl from Mastermind, the Pointless Trophy, and even back in the day, the things that you'd win as like a consolation prize or a going away prize. Like I remember Bullseye used to give away the Bendy Bully used to give away the toy, which is incredibly valuable now, but back then, it's just like a kitsch sort of prize.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure whether things like that would necessarily work in the US, where the money seems to be the main focus of the game shows over there.
Well, I think that the most cerebral show we have on the air right now would be Jeopardy.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the closest thing we have to something like Countdown, which we'll talk about Countdown in a minute because I think that some people listening might not be familiar with it. But Jeopardy, I think, is closest to Countdown in terms of longevity, in terms of prestige. You know, the show has been on, this version has been on for, almost 40 years at this point. And it's, again, the most cerebral show we have. And I also noticed that Jeopardy very rarely, unless it's a special case where somebody stays on for, 20 or 30 days and wins $1 million, they very rarely focus on the money. Jeopardy is not one of those shows that talks about, you could win $50,000 in a day, which is incredibly possible if you're really good at Jeopardy. That can happen every day. But they never really focus on that. They do focus on the material and the contestants, and which I think is what they should do.
Yeah, I think what makes Jeopardy stand out in the States especially is there's not many trivia based game shows here, whereas over here that's that's kind of the main subgenre of game show that we have would be a quiz show, whereas in the US not so much, I don't think.
No, that's true. We are more of a game show society than a quiz show society.
Yeah.
Where we focus on puzzles and, guessing the price and charades and all that kind of, clever wordplay and hangman and all that. But yeah, I managed a radio station when I was in college, and I had my own office with the TV, and I used to catch up with all of my favorite British game shows on BitTorrent. So I was watching The Chase every day.
Yeah.
I was watching Countdown with Jeff Stelling every day back when he was hosting it. That was just my favorite way to spend an afternoon. I love they're very cozy and very cerebral, and that's my favorite sort of subcategory of game show.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether American game shows necessarily have the same. I don't know whether we're the same warmth really as something like Countdown, because again, a lot of the focus, apart from Jeopardy, most of the time the focus is on the money rather than the game itself, I think.
Right, which is why when I was in college, Countdown was such a breath of fresh air. Also, as somebody who grew up loving anagrams and loving words and wordplay and Scrabble, and the game just completely spoke to me. I wonder if you could, for the benefit of anyone listening who's not familiar with Countdown, you could give me a brief explanation of how Countdown is played.
Okay, so how Countdown is played would be, the contestants select, consonant or vowel, 9 letters, and then they have to form a word from the 9 letters. And then there's the number round where, they'll select 6 numbers and a target will be generated, and then they have to use those 6 numbers to make that target.
And that's really pretty much it. And, on paper, it doesn't sound like a lot. It doesn't sound like it would be an incredibly compelling game show. But for somebody who loves puzzles and someone who loves words, it is, I think it's the ultimate word game as far as game shows are concerned. And it's been on the air since 1982. It's gone through so many different hosts, but the format has stayed the same. The music for 99% of its run has stayed the same. And I love Countdown. It's really one of my favorite shows. Tell me how the opportunity to appear as a contestant came about for you. How did you become a contestant on Countdown?
Well, a lot of the channels here, BBC, ITV, Channel 4, they have take part sections on their website. So when they're looking for contestants for their shows, the advertisements will go up on their website. So I applied from the Channel 4 website, and I ended up getting on the show.
Now, to be a Now, to become a contestant on Countdown, was this a goal that you had for a long time? You mentioned that it was a show you had watched for a while.
Yeah, because I think Countdown is probably a good one to start out on, because if you're trying to get on a load of game shows, Countdown is probably a good one to start with, because there's no huge stakes really. So whether you win or lose, you still had a nice day out. Whereas if you went on a big money one first, I think maybe you'd be a bit more disappointed with a loss than you would be on Countdown.
That's an interesting point. And I've talked to a lot of contestants who have appeared on multiple shows, and I don't know that up to this point there have been any contestants who have had that opportunity. I mean, I've talked to people who have appeared in things like our equivalent of University Challenge, like College Bowl or that kind of thing, or as a kid they were on a sort of kids game show, like a local sort of like a local show. But it's interesting to have that opportunity to be on a big time game show without the pressure of knowing that if you lose, you're not going there with bills to pay. You're not going there with the goal of securing a new life for yourself as a result of what you win. It's either teapot or no teapot.
Yeah. And I think the key to Countdown's success is the fact that the format is so simple and there's no high stakes. That's kind of the key to it, really. It's so straightforward that you can play at any age, really, whether you're 5 or 95. You can play along with Countdown. You can understand the rules. It's like probably the most straightforward one to understand the rules of, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Tell me about your love of word games. Tell me how far back that goes. And I'd love to know about some of the word games and activities that you enjoyed, whether they're game shows or not.
Well, like I said, I watched Countdown from a young age because my grandparents used to watch it a lot. So when I go and see them, I'd watch Countdown, and I'd enjoy it. And that kind of led to a lot of word games. I discovered the UK version of Wheel of Fortune a few years after that, when they were repeating it on Challenge. I quite enjoyed that. Wordle, when that was big last year, I played that. I still play it sometimes, even though I know the hype around it's died out quite a bit, but I still play it sometimes. Lingo, I enjoy watching that at times.
Right. And then, like we said, Countdown is just like the ultimate word game. And so I imagine that it was beneficial to have so much practice with so many different word games. And let's talk about Wheel of Fortune for a second. Wheel of Fortune is a show that it's almost the opposite, where it had a bit of a run in the UK for a few years, but it's like a cultural icon in America. And it's not a cultural icon for the fact that it's a word game. Again, the focus is on the prizes and the sort of glitz and glamour of the show. Vanna White, who was the assistant, the co-host, and turned the letters on the puzzle board, became a household name as a result of Wheel of Fortune. A much different history than the show has in the UK. And it's interesting that you bring that up as a word game, because that's exactly what it is. And I think that gets lost in a lot of the presentation of the show, that it's a fun game. It's Hangman on television.
Yeah. I think the UK version focused more on the word element than the money element to the show. But I think that's true of UK versions of US shows most of the time anyway. I think the one exception maybe would be the Price is Right, where the focus is on the money a lot in there.
Right. And I think that even when The Price is Right premiered, it was very, from what I understand, it was very atypical from other British television at the time. Contestants on British game shows didn't jump up and down and run around the stage and scream and cry and do what they do on TV here every day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think when it first came out, I think a lot of the criticism around it was they felt too American, but it ended up being fairly successful here as well. So,
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Many different versions over the years.
yeah.
So let's talk about the audition process for Countdown. I'd love to know what a prospective contestant has to go through in order to get that opportunity to be on the show. Tell me what that process was like for you.
Well, I think usually they do in-person auditions, but this was there was still COVID restrictions in place at the time, so it was a phone call, and the phone call was with one of the producers of the show, and you just play, a few rounds of the game. So you play the letters, the numbers, and a conundrum round on the phone, and however, well, it depends how well you do. However well you do, that depends on how you get on the show.
And do you remember feeling particularly confident in your audition as far as the gameplay was concerned?
I wasn't sure because I think I'm not sure whether I wasn't sure whether I did particularly well. I felt like I did fairly average at the time. I didn't think I did necessarily great, but I didn't think I did badly either. So it could have gone either way. But thankfully, I ended up getting onto the show.
Sure. And are you the kind of person who goes through an audition or a test or something of that nature and has anxiety about, what if I did bad? Well, I hope I did good. Like, or are you the kind of person that can put it out of their mind and sort of continue life as normal? I think I can be both.
Yeah, I think normally, if I have an audition for a quiz show, I usually get nervous, but I also think it depends on the show, because I think if it's like a quiz show, I'll be a bit more nervous. But with Countdown, I felt a little bit more at ease because it's not a general knowledge game show, so you don't have to worry about, oh, what if I said an embarrassingly wrong answer, which sometimes worries me with the quiz show auditions at times.
Sure. And I think even in the case of like the numbers game in Countdown, if you happen to use a number twice or do your math incorrectly, it's never a point of embarrassment. They always seem to commiserate along with you, which I always appreciate about that show.
Yeah, that's true. I think, it's a warm show. They don't put anyone down or make fun of any wrong answers, or it's a friendly show to be on.
Yes, for sure. And that comes across. Absolutely. So you go through the audition process, they interview you, and you play the game. Now, was this the only game show that you had auditioned for at the time? Were you trying to get on anything else, or was it strictly Countdown?
Well, I'd applied for a few shows, whichever game shows are casting at that moment of time, usually I apply for that. But I think Countdown's the one I was always aiming for because, it's the one that I make an effort to watch daily, really. So I think that's the main one I was aiming for. But I'd auditioned for a couple of other shows. I'd had a phone audition for Eggheads, that was one, and for a show called The Tournament, which isn't on anymore. But yeah. But I wasn't, successful in either of those auditions. But thankfully, I passed the Countdown one.
And you had mentioned earlier that you used to watch Countdown when you went to your grandparents' house. Now, if you don't mind me asking, were they around to see your success on Countdown?
Yes, they're still
wonderful,
around,
wonderful, wonderful. So I'm sure they must have been incredibly proud once they heard you were making it on the show. I imagine they were massively proud of you.
Yeah. All my family tuned in to watch it, so yeah.
And so again, you go through the audition process, and then at some point you get the call or a letter or some sort of notification indicating that you were on the show. Take me to that moment. When did you find out, and how did you find out that you were going to officially become a contestant?
I found out. I found out through email, and that wasn't long. I think that was like a couple of weeks after the audition. Although it had taken a while from the application to the audition point. That took a few months. But once I'd auditioned, yeah, I found out that I passed the audition about a week or two later. So that's, yeah.
So this is a fairly fast and efficient process. I've talked to contestants that waited for months. I mean, in the case of Jeopardy, they put you in what they call the contestant pool, and it can be a year or two before they call you. So this is, by comparison, a very fast process.
Well, between auditioning and finding out I was on the show, yeah. But it did take quite a few months between applying and getting the audition, because I'd applied for it a couple of times in the past as well and hadn't been successful. So I think this is my third application, and that's the one where I finally got into the show.
And now that you know you're going to be on the show, is there anything in particular that you do to prepare or study or sharpen your anagram, your math skills? How do you prepare to be on the show?
Well, I'm a member of a countdown-based website called Apterous, so I started playing on there a bit more when I knew I was going to be on the show.
And that's interesting as well. I'm very familiar with Apterous. I've spent many hours that I should have been doing homework on, playing games on Apterous. And it's interesting, again, going back to the comparison between the UK's Countdown and the USA's Jeopardy. There's a website called the J Archive that is a compendium of every clue that's ever been given on Jeopardy. And it is this incredible sort of crowdsourced archive of every bit of material they've used. And so many contestants use it and study and figure out, what categories come up most often, where the daily doubles are most often. And it's interesting that Countdown, again, a show that I consider to be Jeopardy's sort of analog in terms of its longevity and so on, that there's a website in a similar vein.
Yeah, and I think, I'd been a member of Apterous for a few years at the time anyway, but I started going on it more often to prepare for the show. And I also started, when I was watching the show at home, I started writing it down on a piece of paper as well, writing the rounds down on a piece of paper to prepare for going on the show.
Right, yeah, that's a great way to practice as well. And again, this is all kind of second nature to us because we love the show and we love the game. But Apterous, for anyone that's not familiar, is a website that it's for fans of Countdown, and you can sort of play a full 15-round game of Countdown against another member. It's sort of it's ranked if you want it to be, but there are casual matches as well, and a lot of prospective Countdown contestants use the website to sharpen their skills, and a lot of users of the website have gone on to win many games on Countdown. I don't know how many Octo Champs they've had from their pool of Apterous users, but it has to be a lot. I mean, am I fair in that summation of Apterous?
Yeah, because I think the last few series champions have all come from Apterous. Really, I can't remember the last time someone won their series that wasn't from Apterous. It's been a long time, I think.
Right. Yeah, it's an incredible resource. And writing the letters down, I remember, I don't know who I heard this from, and I don't know if you can lend any insight to this, but I remember hearing once that it was recommended that the best way to write your 9 letters would be in a 3x3 grid so that you can connect them almost like Boggle, and that it makes it easier for your brain to process the letters rather than them being in a straight line. If you put them in a box in a 3x3 matrix, it's a little easier to for your brain to kind of suss out the possible words.
Yeah, I just wrote them, normally like as they appear on the board. But yeah, maybe that would be a useful way of being able to spot words. Yeah, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and I've always, like, when I play along with the game or when I play with friends, I always write the letters from left to right, and I just kind of stare at them, and words seem to come out. I don't know if that's as a result of just, spending a lifetime kind of playing around with words and letters in my head. It just kind of becomes second nature, or what, or if that's a common thing. But yeah, that's always how I did it.
Yeah, I think what I do when I write down the letters, I look for common endings like ing, ier, yeah, and try and spot words based on that.
There was a show, this is going back to 1974. There's a show in America, a very obscure show called Winning Streak. Winning Streak was an interesting game, and I'll explain it to you, and I feel like you might like it. And again, it didn't last very long. Nobody seemed to get a hold of it, but I really enjoyed it. So it's two contestants, and they show you a board of 16 letters, and they give you a category. So the category might be breakfast foods. So you pick a letter off the board. The host reads a question. If you buzz in and give the right answer, you get that letter. And the idea is that you are constructing a word that fits that category by picking the letters off the board and answering the questions that begin with those letters. So it's a little bit of Countdown and a little bit of Blockbusters. It's a really interesting game. There's so many, I think anagrams are an untapped resource when it comes to game shows. Countdown does it really well, but I love word games. I could always watch a good word game.
Yeah, I haven't seen that Winning Streak. I'm not sure if any episodes are on YouTube, or I might have to check that out.
Yeah, there might be one. I'll send it to you once we're done. I think there's like one episode on YouTube. Anyway, okay. So let's talk about your appearance on Countdown. Let's talk about the day you make it to the studio. So this is a show whose set has changed from an aesthetic standpoint. Has changed from time to time, but largely it's an iconic piece of television history to be there and to sit at the desk and to have your name in front of you, and then that clock, the iconic countdown clock. Tell me what it was like seeing all of that in person for the first time.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a strange that I felt like I was more starstruck by the set rather than any of the hosts or anything. I felt like being on the set was like more of a starstruck experience for me. It's interesting.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I went to see The Price is Right when I was 18 years old. I felt the same way. It was great to see the host and to be part of the game and play the game eventually, but just to see this set that I've been watching for years and years and years. I mean, I could have come away from that experience happy just having done that.
Yeah. And I think, being in the same room as the clock, which is probably one of the most iconic set pieces, definitely over here. That was, a really interesting experience.
If you don't mind me asking, and I don't know if you got a good read on this, how tall is the clock?
I'm not sure because I'm trying to just picture the desk at the minute because you have the champion on the left and the challenger on the right, and then the clock in the middle of them. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'd be able to give an exact answer to that. I'm
sure,
not
that's
sure.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you had any kind of general idea from standing next to it if it was as tall as you. I know that things on TV always are smaller in real life than they seem on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah, because the set was fairly small, although I think with Countdown I kind of expected to have the set be small, whereas I went to see Millionaire in the audience a while, and the set for that was much smaller than it appears on TV.
Yes, it is much smaller and much quieter as well. When I was a contestant on the show, they didn't even play the music. That they added all that later in the edit, which was interesting to me. But yeah, Countdown looks like it would be a very cozy little set, and I wonder if you have any insight into how the production staff prepares you for the show. What is that process like? Do they tell you? I guess I'm specifically asking. Do they tell you you're not allowed to spell any certain words? Do they tell you you're not allowed to say certain things? Are there, what are the guidelines for being a Countdown contestant that a viewer of the show might not be aware of just from watching?
Well, they send you guidelines, which just kind of outline the rules and the format of the show. They also send guidelines about which colors you're not allowed to wear, or which you can't have logos on your clothes or anything. So, but there was no specific guidelines against saying any specific words, really.
I thought I saw an article on BuzzFeed a few years ago that there were certain rules of etiquette that contestants were sort of encouraged, or it was suggested that they follow these, because if not, they get complaints from the older viewers that think that the contestants are being rude, or that the show is being rude by not by not saying certain things or allowing them to say certain things. I thought I saw something like that a while ago, that there was a whole kind of list of things like that.
Yeah, I just remembered one. It's when you're picking the letters, you're only supposed to say please after the first and the last one, because apparently they get complaints if you don't say please enough, but they also get complaints if you say please too many times. So you're only supposed to say please after the first and the last.
Interesting. Oh, I'm thinking of it. Yeah, and that's exactly what they do. They'll say consonant, please, and then they'll say and a vowel and another, and then the final one they go and a consonant, please. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm always fascinated by the elements of game shows that are sort of invisible to the casual viewer. Those things that you only experience if you're part of the show or if you're there in person. Interesting. Very interesting. So, game one, how nervous are you heading into this first game of Countdown?
Well, they film 5 shows in a day. They film a week's worth in a day. My first game was the second show filmed that day, so I got to watch the first game in my dressing room. They gave us dressing rooms. So, I think that made me a bit nervous now, because then, when you're watching the first game in your dressing room, it's just as if you're watching it on TV, but then suddenly it dawns on you, oh wait, I have to play against that person in the next game. So I think the nerves started about halfway through watching that earlier game in my.
Sure. And I guess that that a person would feel a little bit more confident, because I imagine that they give you a tour of the set. They kind of show you where to sit and how to sit. And, from a physical standpoint, you're already sort of accustomed to it by the time you play.
Yeah, because, you get introduced to everyone, and they'll go through, what they'll talk about at the start of the show. They just give you a general description of what's going to happen before you go to film. So, yeah, but I found it quite nerve-wracking. The first game was the one I was the most nervous for.
And who was your host when you were on the show?
It was Colin Murray, but he wasn't permanent yet at the time. I think he was just the interim, because this was after after Anne Robinson had stopped, but before they brought in a new host permanently.
And it's funny, Anne Robinson is one of those personalities that had a brief and bright existence here in America from a public eye point of view. But a lot of people don't realize that, she hosted The Weakest Link here for a couple of years, but she hosted the entire run there. I think it only went off in 2015 or 16. And she stayed in the public eye for a long time in the UK, and she was the host of Countdown for a while. I wasn't able to watch much of her work as host on Countdown, and I wonder how much of that Weakest Link type personality carried over, if any at all.
Yeah, I found it interesting because I think it was. I don't think she was necessarily the best fit for the host, just because that Weakest Link persona sort of carried over a little bit. She was a little bit nicer on Countdown compared to the Weakest Link, but she still had her moments. But I'm not sure whether that necessarily suited the vibe and the atmosphere of Countdown, really, which has always been more of a warm show. I'm not sure whether she was necessarily the right person for it. I didn't mind her as much as some seem to, but I think I'm glad that when I was on, it was Colin.
And I know Colin Murray was a big Countdown fan. What was his background as far as the show is concerned? What made him a good host for the show?
Well, he'd guest hosted a couple of times during COVID when Nick Hewer couldn't make the filming. So he guest hosted a few times, and he'd been in Dictionary Corner a load of times as a guest. So I think that helped because the viewers were familiar with him. So that probably made it more of a seamless transition.
And I've always been of the opinion that a good game show host makes their contestants feel welcomed and makes them feel at ease and comfortable and affirmed and ready to play. Did Colin do that for you?
Yeah, he was very friendly to all the contestants. He introduced himself at the start of the show. Just go through what his opening spiel would be, and he'd try and make everyone feel welcome.
And now you went on to win 3 games of Countdown, which is an incredible feat. That's very impressive. From talking to people who have won multiple games on Jeopardy and other shows, I've been led to believe that the second, third, fourth appearance gets a little bit easier because you have that confidence from the first or second or third win, but the pressure mounts as well. Now, I imagine, again, there's not as much pressure here because there's no huge money at stake. If you win your first game, you get that teapot, which a lot of people aspire to bring home. So I imagine everything else after that is sort of icing on the cake. Was that a similar experience for you? Were you more confident after game number 1?
Yeah, because I got the first win under my belt, so I felt a little bit more at ease.
And I can tell because those second and third games, you won by a pretty impressive margin. I think you won with a score of 87 in game 2 and a score of 80 in game 3, which are very high scores. Any particular memories of those 2 games that sticks out as funny or surreal or unusual?
Yeah, it was the second game, I think. I had to change one of my words that I'd declared because they decided that it wasn't appropriate for broadcast at the time that the show went out. So in one of the rounds, I got the word fannies as a 7, but then they decided they couldn't show it, so they gave me the word infants instead.
So that's interesting because, right, again, we're dealing with random letters, so So dirty words may come up, and as long as they appear in the Oxford Dictionary, they're valid on Countdown, and that includes all the profanities and obscenities and things like that you might find in an unabridged dictionary. When that happens, so you got the 7-letter word fannies, and they say, okay, we can't use that. Do they give you an equivalent 7-letter word?
Yeah. So yeah, they gave me the word infants. I didn't spot that word myself. They changed it for me.
Oh, how interesting. I didn't know that that's how they did that, but that makes sense because you're still getting the credit for finding a 7, but it's just not the one that you initially found.
Yeah, but it's interesting with those because some of them seem to get through the censors and then others don't, because I'm sure there's been a couple of instances where the same word fannies has been shown uncensored. I don't know how they decide when it's right to use or when it's not. It seems a bit inconsistent at times, but I don't know how they do it.
It does, and I'll cut this part. I probably won't use this part, but I've seen them use the word wankers several times, and they bleep it, and there's a little bit of a laugh, but they still accept it. So I wonder what dictates when they use a word like that and when they don't. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it depends on whether that was the only word of that length that was in the selection, because luckily with mine there was another 7 in the selection. I think if the word fannies had been the only 7 there, they might have had to keep it in because there wouldn't have been any alternative really other than to cut the word out, which wouldn't have made any sense really.
Right. And so 3 games won. In game number 4, what, looking back, and I hate to put you in a position to overanalyze your performance, but what do you think contributed to you not winning that 4th game? I can imagine that even though there's not much at stake financially or monetarily or from like a merchandise prize standpoint, it is exhausting being on camera and under the lights time after time after time. Do you think that contributed to your performance in that last game, or was it something else, if you can identify?
Yeah, I think, I was a bit tired by that last game because I'd filmed, 3 shows in a row before. Since, with all my games being filmed in one day, I think it would be hard to keep up that same ability throughout all of them, really.
Right. It is exhausting. And again, talking to people who have been multiple time champions on other shows, the pressure of appearing TV ready and, being in front of the camera and really, performing, because most game show contestants are not born performers or professional performers. It takes a lot of energy. So I admire anyone I admire anyone who could win 3 games of Countdown, let alone 8. I mean, what an incredible feat that is. So I'd love to talk about after the show. Now, Jeopardy contestants, when they win a certain number of games, they get a bit of media attention. That's just sort of the way the news cycle works in America these days. If you're a successful Jeopardy contestant, you'll get interviewed and you'll get profiled and you'll, find yourself having received a bit of attention. Did that hold true for you? What attention did you get as a result of your time on Countdown, if any?
Yeah, I don't think I really got much media attention. I don't really think I got any media attention. I think that would be reserved really for the ones that win 8. They get a bit more focus. But with me winning 3, nothing really, apart from, the people I know personally, they all tuned into the show to see me, or even if they wouldn't watch it normally, they tune in to see me. So I think that was nice. Yeah. So even though I didn't necessarily get attention from the media, I got quite a lot of attention from the people I know personally.
And when it aired, did you watch it with your grandparents?
No, I didn't. I didn't watch my shows as they aired. I watched them a little bit later. I was a bit nervous to watch myself on screen, because I don't know if this is a common thing or not. I don't like the sound of my own voice on camera. It doesn't, it doesn't sound like how I expect it to sound. Me speaking now and then playing the recording of my voice back, it doesn't sound like how I'd expect it. So I didn't watch it when it aired for that reason, really. But I managed to watch it a little bit later on. And, it was interesting, because then I'm looking back thinking, oh, how did I not spot that word?
It is so the problem that you described, Christy, is much, much, much more common than you may think. I think that is probably one of the most common things people feel about watching themselves or hearing recordings of their own voice. I used to hate my own voice, and even now I'm sort of my own worst critic when it comes to hearing myself speak on a recording. But it sort of took brute force and recording a podcast every week and editing it myself and getting used to that sound before I realized, okay, this doesn't sound so bad. It doesn't sound as bad to the world as I think it sounds. So that is very common. That's very interesting that you bring that up. That hesitation to see what the world, what you look like to the world or what you sound like to the world. But I'm glad you were able to watch it. Did your grandparents get to see it at all?
Yeah, they got to see it. I didn't watch it with them. I watched it by myself a bit later on. But yeah,
I would love to know how they felt. I would love to know what they had to say to you. That they had to have been so proud. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think my family as a whole were proud of me being on the show, because I'd always been kind of reserved, really. So I think it was a big step to appear on a game show on TV, really.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and that's something that I celebrate when it comes to that contestant experience. Like we mentioned, the people who appear as contestants on game shows are not television professionals. A lot of the time, I'd say the vast majority of the time, it's their first time ever on television. It's their first time in front of a camera of that type. It's their first time, meeting a celebrity in terms of, the host or the people on the show. And so, even to produce a performance like that, right? To win 3 games and I would say even to win 1 game, under that pressure and, feeling that type of performance anxiety that a person is typically not used to, is an enormous achievement. And I wonder if you look at the experience as not only an accomplishment in terms of the game and in terms of in terms of game shows, but as a personal accomplishment, as a challenge, and as maybe something that would open the door to other opportunities for you to put yourself out there. I wonder if you have that insight into the experience.
Yeah, well, I think with Countdown, with it being my first TV appearance, I think it's, that day I spent filming the show, I'll always remember it. So I'll always have that memory. And even if I get on any more shows in the future, Countdown will always be the first one I appeared on. So that will, kind of stick out a bit more.
Tell Us About Yourself. Conversations with Game Show Contestants is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Christian Carrion, from my studio in beautiful downtown Lancaster City, Pennsylvania. Co-executive producer Cory Anotado. Researcher Chuck Donegan. This has been a production of BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world, in partnership with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. For more information, visit museumofplay.org. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Christian Carrion. Good night. Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700.